Welcome again to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles. I have a very special guest for you today. It is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, and we are going to talk about the Republican Party and its issues with reaching Black voters. And just want to say thank you for joining me, Mr. Huckabee. And how you doing?
Jeff, I'm doing great, and true honor to be with you. And I look forward to what I hope will be a very informative discussion of an issue that Republicans and conservatives ought to be talking a lot about, but unfortunately they're not.
Yes, exactly. So just to get right into it, just to put it out there, a lot of people don't know this, but when you ran for governor, you won 48% of the Black vote. 48%, yeah. Like that is almost unheard of for a Republican. So can you give us an idea of the steps that you took to accomplish that?
You know, Jeff, to my knowledge, no Republican candidate in recent times, white or Black, has ever received that kind of support from the African-American community. And people ask me why. Unfortunately, I tried to get the RNC years ago to be more interested in it, and it fell mostly on deaf ears. I think that there is this presumption that African Americans simply are not going to vote for Republicans. That's not true. I think I proved it's not true. I think President Trump proved that it isn't true. And he had a far greater percentage of African American votes than perhaps any Republican presidential candidate has had in recent times. Here's what Republicans need to understand. The African American community is far more ideologically aligned with Republicans than they are with Democrats. First of all, African Americans tend to be more conservative when it comes to the social issues. This is surprising to a lot of people, but not so much with the vocal leaders, not Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson, maybe not Stacey Abrams. But if you talk to people, rank and file in the African American community, they believe in traditional biblical marriage. They are pro-life. They understand that the abortion industry has targeted the African-American community and that a disproportionate number of African-American babies are aborted, far more so, and that they are, in essence, being targeted by Planned Parenthood, whose founder was an avowed racist and believed in eugenics. So this is something that people in the Republican Party need to understand. We have a natural alliance. When it comes to the marriage issue, quite frankly, African Americans are more committed and believe more deeply in traditional biblical marriage than people of the white community. I will say that the Hispanic community exceeds even that of the African American community. Another minority that we ought to be recognizing we have a great opportunity to win. What I found was that there's an old saying in church work, Jeff, that says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
When I first got into office, I didn't have that kind of widespread support. I had to work at it. I had to earn it. And I didn't go out and wait till the month before election, show up in a few traditional African-American places and say, oh, hey, I'm running. I hope you'll vote for me. And that's what traditionally Republicans have done. It's very ineffective. In fact, it's an insult because it's almost like we're just going to show up just before the election and pretend that we suddenly are interested in a community that we've ignored for 4 years. It doesn't work like that. I spent years developing relationships with people who are leaders in the community, state legislators, pastors, business leaders, and then quite frankly, and this is the most important, people that nobody ever heard of. When I would go to a place and it was an event, I'd spend time going into the kitchen and meeting every person in here who was cooking and stirring food. Truth is, Jeff, I grew up dirt poor. I've got a lot more in common with the folks working in the kitchen than the folks sitting at the head table. I had to learn how to sit at the head table. I had to learn how to go out and eat at the restaurant. I never did that as a kid. So I didn't understand the world of being the served. I was from the world of being the server. And I understood that sometimes people just need to know that they're noticed and recognized.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of it. But then when I became governor, one of the things that I was committed to doing was being governor, not just for the people who voted for me, but for the people who didn't. And in that regard, we had some serious issues in our state, educational disparities, particularly healthcare delivery disparities. So I marshaled more assets and resources in the African-American community. And I will say this, a disproportionate share. In other words, they may have represented 17% of the population of the overall state. In some parts of the state, they represented a majority.
Okay.
But we put resources into those areas, particularly in the Arkansas Delta, that were far removed from access to healthcare by putting community health centers and beefing up the capacity to treat things like diabetes and hypertension, which were rampant in the African-American community. I didn't do that because they voted for me. I did it because they had the need. And you know what? They knew that they didn't vote for me. And they knew that no Democrat governor had ever paid as much attention as I had. I used to joke that I spent more time in Helena, Arkansas, which was majority African-American, had an African-American mayor, African-American county executive, mostly African-Americans in the elected positions, overwhelming African-American in population. I said, I spent more time in Helena than I did in Hope, my hometown. And I said, the reason I did that was because they don't need me so much in Hope, but they need me in Helena. And we looked at ways in which we could make the education system better for the kids in Helena and places like that. Focused on job creation there and focused on healthcare access. And as much as anything, it's being there. You cannot substitute. There's an old saying about love is spelled Time. And I think that's true in family life, Jeff, but I think it's also true in political life. If you want to convince people that you care about them, you don't do that by making a flyover visit and waving at a parade. You get out of the car and you wade into that crowd and you shake hands and you hug necks and you ask questions and you get to know people and you look into the faces of the children and you give them a hug and you identify and relate. And people recognize that. And it can't be phony. That's why I say you can't show up the month before election year. But that's the sort of the bread and butter of it. It's a matter of recognizing the people in the African-American community are not my natural adversaries. They are my natural allies. And when I look at it that way, approach it that way, and spend time that way, I think Republicans have an incredible opportunity to harvest and to connect to the votes of Black Americans everywhere.
Gotcha. And that's kind of what I figured you would say. I mean, you spent a lot of time building relationships. It sounds like you did a lot of fellowshipping with the African-American community where you are. So my question is, I mean, you've laid out the blueprint here, but you also mentioned that the RNC wasn't quite receptive to talking about this issue. Why do you think that the Republican Party and its candidates have such a problem doing what you did? Because it doesn't sound complicated, but I don't really understand what the issue is.
Jeff, I think the reason is that there's not been a tradition of it. I think there's been maybe the history that Republicans maybe at one time really were more the country club crowd. They were the business interest, and they just assumed that the working class people, white and Black, really were not going to be as amenable to our message. That's changed over the past few years. The Democrats are now, quite frankly, the party of big business. The big tech companies and the big media companies, they're all Democrat. Major corporations, they're all woke. They're all playing right into the hands of the Democrats. Who are the Republicans championing? The small business owner, the mom and pops, the people who run, a corner grocery store or a barbecue shack. out in rural America, the people who are standing on concrete floors all day, lifting heavy things, going home bone tired and having sweated through their clothes at work. That's who that really are our natural allies. That's who we are fighting for. So part of it is communicating that message to them. Let me say this, Jeff, I think it's very important. Never change the message when you go into a different community, whether it's Hispanic or African American or whoever it is. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people have made. Having one message when you speak to the Chamber of Commerce and then another one when you go and speak to the AME Church. That's nonsense. Be consistent. People notice that. And frankly, one of the things that I believe was most significant was that it wasn't just the things that I said, it was the things that I did. When I ran for re-election, I had several prominent African-American Democrat elected officials walking the streets with me in their community, introducing me at barbershops and beauty shops all day on Saturdays. And I don't have to tell you, if you want to touch the community, that's where you go.
Yes.
And they were introducing me. They were putting themselves at risk in a way with their own party, but they had seen me at that point for 6 years. They knew 6.5 years. I covered 2.5 years of a previous governor's term when he was thrown out of office, and I moved up to lieutenant governor. And then I had 4 years of my own when I was reelected. So it wasn't that I told them what I was going to do. I was basing it, and they were basing it on what I had done. But I believe that this is true not just for me or somebody who's been in office. Our party and the conservative message resonates with people who want their children to have the same opportunities for a decent education as any other kid. The richest kid in town ought not to be so overwhelmingly advantaged. When I hear people talking about racism today, there's no greater level of racism than a disparate education system where some families, particularly hardworking single moms, are stuck in a public school, not of their choice, but of their geography. And they don't have the options for their children to do better. If their kids want to play in the band, they don't have the money to afford the rent for an instrument. Their kids can't participate. I started programs like Play It Again Arkansas. This is just an example. We asked people who had musical instruments under their bed or in their closet that they haven't used in a long time. We said, donate it to Play It Again. We'll get it fixed up and put in good shape and put it in the hands of kids whose parents can't afford to get them a musical instrument, so that no child is blocked out of being able to participate in a music program because of finances. This wasn't a taxpayer thing. We coordinated it through the education department. But I'll tell you, it made a difference in the lives of kids who wanted to play. But, their mom said, son, I can't afford $25 a month or $40 a month for a tuba or, a trumpet. I just can't do it. Anyway, I don't mean to belabor it, but I think you hear in what I'm saying, Jeff, is that this is, I'll say it again, it's not about what we say, it's about what we do. But the natural message of the Republican Party, which is more limited government, personal liberty, letting me move up in the economic spectrum as I work harder, giving me equal opportunity, not guaranteed opportunity, but equal opportunity.
Right.
Those are issues that resonate. I don't care what color you are. This is America, and it's how America really works. And I don't think that's a white or a black message. It's an American message. But when I think of Republicans, I think some of them believe that there's sort of a different message that will work with African Americans. And that's just not true. I really don't agree with that at all. And I find that what matters is authenticity, sincerity, and most of all, a compelling understanding of what liberty does in a person's life.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I can definitely appreciate what you said about that musical program. As a fellow bass player, I know that that's very important because I learned as a kid too. So it is important. So last question. I mean, everything that you laid out is wonderful. What would you say? Because one of the concerns that people express to me is like, oh, well, if we go into Black communities, they'll call us racist, they'll kick us out, or, CNN will call us racist. What do you say to that? Because that had to have happened to you, right? And I'm sure somebody called you racist when you were running.
Oh yeah. Well, I was actually, this is kind of a funny thing. My daughter, Sarah, went with me one time on a Sunday morning to an African-American church where I was supposed to speak. I was very careful, unlike a lot of Democrats who would use a church appearance to openly campaign. I never did. I would go and I would worship. And if they asked me to speak, I never mentioned a thing about voting for me or that I was campaigning. Because I didn't believe that was the appropriate use of a pulpit. They noticed that. But more importantly, it's what I believed. I didn't believe that was the right place. But anyway, I was invited to this African-American church, and my daughter was with me. It had a profound impact on her. But before the service, I noticed that something seemed kind of tense. I just couldn't tell. People were coming in and out of the pastor's office. And finally, the pastor came in, he sat down, he said, "I am so sorry." He said, "But I've got some people who are very upset that you're here. They don't want a Republican in our church." I'm thinking, gee, what a role reversal. I can remember when an African-American going to a white church would be told, you got to leave. And he said, "I'm very embarrassed, but if I let you speak today, I'm probably going to have a walkout of people and I'm going to, face a real fire." So I said, "Look, you know what, brother? Let me just, I don't want to put you on the hook here." So my daughter and I slipped out the back door, got in our car, and we left. We were, I guess the best way to say it, we were literally thrown out of an African-American church. It was kind of revealing. And that was obviously before things turned around. But here's what I think I learned from that. They didn't know me, didn't know what I was going to say or do. I could have said, "Well, that's it. I'm never going back to the African-American world. They insulted me. They hurt my feelings. They disrespected me." I mean, at that time, I think I was lieutenant governor. So I was the sitting lieutenant governor of the state, held an elected official position. I didn't. I just kept going. I just kept going. I just kept going. And I would say to any of my fellow conservatives and Republicans, you may not get a hug the first time you go. You may be greeted with suspicion and doubt because they've seen it all before. Keep going and keep doing. When I was governor, Jeff, I appointed more African Americans to prominent leadership positions in my government than Bill Clinton had ever done. And that was a shock to people when they realized that. More people held the highest positions in state government under me. And I'll tell you why that was significant. Because there were far fewer African Americans who were willing to identify with a Republican governor than they would have with a Democrat governor. I did the same thing with women. More women served in high places. So to bring it back to full circle, and I know you've given me more time than you agreed to, but just to say, it's not that we need to say different things. We need to speak what's in our heart, be honest and truthful, but it's what we do. And it's not that we tell people that we care about them. We care about them by how we act and how we relate. And we show a comfort level and a lack of fear and anxiety about the relationships. And we never give up. We never give up.
Perfect. That was the greatest answer. And coming from you, I really hope that gets some of us, some more conservatives, more comfortable with the idea, because it's one thing if I say it, but you actually did it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I know you're busy, but was there anything else that you wanted to say that I didn't bring up?
Just to say this, that I so appreciate your bringing it up. And I wish more people would talk about it openly. our country is at risk right now. And the opportunities for African Americans are not with having more government be their nanny, be their boss, be their guide. This is true for whether you're white, black, brown, red, doesn't matter. What matters is personal liberty, freedom, independence, a sense of self-sufficiency, and helping the next generation to be able to do that. It's as simple as this. My job as a parent was to not raise my children so that they would be forever dependent upon me. It was to raise them so they would be forever independent of me. If all of my adult children still required me to take care of them and feed them and clothe them and tuck them in at night, I would have failed as a parent, because my youngest is 38 years old. That would be pretty sad.
Yes.
Our job as parents is to train our replacements. Our job in politics is to train the next generation to run the country, not to be run by the country, but to actually lead and run the country, and to make it a more prosperous and a more place of opportunity for those who come after us.
Awesome. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Jeff, I hope so. Thank you very much. God bless you, and hope you have a great, great weekend.
God bless you too.
Thanks.